Hello, I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute, an institute for the humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. This live broadcast, thanks to your generosity and recording, is day 248 of the project. The project is our innovative, unified cycle of readings that we use in class, as well as guiding our public open events, our different seminars, as well as our larger learning community and those who graduated from the Institute. This is really the heart of Apocatastasис, and it's under construction. So, right now, the project consists of reading through the core of it all. H.G. Wells's outline of history on a yearly basis. Those of you who are enrolled with us for in person or online private classes will have a more expanded reading cursus, including the entirety of the Story of Civilization series and appropriate literature. But for these public broadcasts, come one, come all, we are looking at H.G. Wells's outline of history. This is day 248. When we hit September 1st, we will be back to day 1. So this is a yearly cycle. Today, we're gutting Germany. We're looking at the 40 Years' War. My goodness, I'm tripping over myself. We're looking at the 30 Years' War. That's 30 years. Um, so anyway, here we are. I have all sorts of goodies opened up above. We'll have a hymn. I'll read it as poetry today. Again, we want to get into art when we study history because art really reveals the soul of a time period. And that art could be a painting, indeed, maybe what we associate with the word, but also a film, from the time period, maybe in the 20th century, or statue, anything that is effectively the interior world projected out. I won't get into pedagogy right now, but if you do notice the philosophy behind the project, you'll notice we have a large circle. If you want to visualize this as 3 circles, the largest circle is philosophy and theology, then the focus on history and literature, and then, like a Russian doll within the 2, the focus on art. Those of you who've taken classes with us know that's how things are structured. Basically, the external, invisible, numinous world influencing events on this physical plane in history, and then men turning around and projecting that out. And so we are moved by ideas, and ideas move us to create. So there's this kind of symbiosis between the abstract and the external onto us, our actions, and then those actions inspire art. So that's why we include in each of these classes usually something textual for these broadcasts. So yesterday we had the Vicar of Bray. Today we're back in Germany, so we'll enjoy Mighty Fortress is Our God, a great Lutheran hymn. And then we'll set about ripping up Germany. And as time allows, we'll meditate on the legacy of the 30 Years' War. Probably without a doubt, on the ground, the rise of skepticism in religious claims and absolutist claims. And then in terms of politics, the legacy would almost certainly, the largest legacy of the 30 Years' War would be the Treaty of Westphalia, where the nation state, as we understand it, comes into existence. All right, so those are our marching orders, and what I want to do now is put on our universal screen share and just take a look at something with apocatastasis. And I like to focus one thing each episode, and why not let it be the Off Your Hands donation program. In order to keep capital coming in, we have to be very creative. I imagine at some point we're going to probably have to open up a business, a proper business. It might sell who knows what, rocking chairs, liquor, guns, lawnmowers. I don't know. I imagine at some point the college will grow to a point that we're going to need an outside um, real rock of stability. And uh, when it comes to things of the mind, that's simply not going to happen by market interest. We have to appeal to other aspects. So anyway, until then, we have to have these donations programs. So if you have, well, let's take a look here. We have a whole listing here. Do you have older automobiles, motorcycles, ride-on lawnmowers, tractors, snow blowers, leaf blowers, shop cabinets, those big shop cabinets like you see in factories, power tools, chainsaws, grinders. I won't read all of this here. You have farm implements, you have guns, you have tractors, whatever. We'll take it. We'll take it off your hands, out of your garage, and put that money towards the growth of the Institute. I believe we're at the point now of our growth that we need a location. We need a location. We've outgrown libraries. The cafes are, we've outgrown those as well. We certainly haven't outgrown parks, but sometimes the weather cramps our style. And oh yeah, we're in New England, so we have the winter that knocks that out. So we have other growing pains with the parks. But frankly, I think our students deserve something better than their couch in their house, frankly, or a cafe. These are not really good locations. They might be necessary locations given resources, but we really are going to have to move towards a location to do various activities. I'm done at this point asking boards and begging for spaces and whatnot. I'm so sick of these useless combinations and having to ingratiate myself with these people and hope to get a call back and all this stuff. We just need a location. It's going to save so much time, and it will also increase the stability of the school. So anyway, if you have any of this machinery, we could use it. We really would appreciate it. We'll handle the selling of it, and we'll be very grateful for that donation. I'm sure you'll be grateful to get that space back in your garage or barn or basement. Okay, very good. So now we're going to have to boogie and change once again the camera. And I will, not by reason of ego, I will now change to the stream camera as we move into Göttingen, Germany. Does everyone have their knives ready? Does everyone have their mattox ready? You know what a mattox is? A mattox is it's like an axe on a pick, like a miner's pick. Imagine instead of it having a pointy edge, it has an axe head. It has, a broad axe head. That's a mattox. And I hope you have yours ready. Here we go. I need the stream camera, and so it's going to change abruptly so I can look at the outline of history. There we go. Always confused. Hey, I'm upside down. Okay. Always confusing. But yesterday, we looked at as I'm shaking off the rust myself. Yes, the Lord Oliver Cromwell. We looked at the English Civil War and various things there too. I mean, the shock of killing a king, the shock of killing it, if you were at that time, the Lord's anointed, is quite something. Well, that spirit, which we see in the early modern period, which we might call the Reformation, moving into the early modern period, that spirit, indeed, of divisions. Speaking of separation of a king and his head, of the different churches, of the different, well, really of the idea of a unified Christendom, that spirit's going to continue today, and it's going to continue really in the heart of Europe, in the Holy Roman Empire, as I'm citing the camera here. Now we're going to save Louis the 16th and the Sun King and what's going on in France for tomorrow. So our readings today are mostly going to just concern pages 650, 51, and 52. If you read along with us in this outline of history, which we're doing every single day as part of our project here at Apocatastasis, not just for 1 year, but for the remainder of the Institute. If you do that, you merely have, M-E-R-L-Y, you merely have to commit, you merely have to commit to basically 3 pages, 2 pages. I think if you actually work it out, it's 2.64 pages a day. And I'm using the 1961 edition, which I believe is the last edition of this, which was updated after H.G. Wells's death. So anyway, I'm on page 650 through 52 today. Oh yes, and before we hop into this, let's get our poetry for the day, and that's going to be "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." This is the great Lutheran hymn, and I will not sing it in German. I will not even sing it. We'll just enjoy it as prose. Although there's some fine examples of it on YouTube, including one sung, must have been at a Billy Graham rally in the 80s, in a ballpark, I think a baseball park, which is well done. Now, whether it's "A Mighty Fortress is Our God" or "O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come." We might sing these of a Sunday morning, and strangely enough, "A Mighty Fortress" is actually in the Catholic Breviary in America here. Not altogether an unhappy choice, I must say. I quite like the song. But in any case, we might sing them of a nice Sunday morning, and they're nice hymns and all. But actually, we must remember these are battle hymns. I mean, these were hymns that were being sung on the battlefield in the 30 Years' War and in the various French wars of religion. And we have to really put ourselves in that mindset where religion is something we would not just disagree on or agree on, but fight over. I mean, fight. I don't mean fight in the kitchen or fight at dinner. I mean, do you and I hold convictions enough that we would kill for them? I don't know. But this is a time period that certainly did. That religious topics were so important that it was worth that energy, the people thought. So I'm just waiting for this hymn to come up on screen here. There we go, from hymnody.org, I believe. All right, so here's Luther's hymn, backgrounding our study on the gutting of Germany, 30 Years' War. "A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing, our helper he amidst the flood of mortal ills prevailing. For still our ancient foe does seek to work us woe, his craft and power are great, and armed with cruel hate, on earth is not his equal. Did we in our own strength confide, our striving would be losing, were not the right man on our side, the man of God's own choosing. You ask who that may be. Christ Jesus, it is he. Lord Sabbath his name, from age to age the same, and he must win the battle. And though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God has willed his truth to triumph through us. The prince of darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure, one little word shall fell him. That word above all earthly powers, no thanks to them abideth. The spirit and the gift are ours, through him who with us sideth. Let goods and kindred go, this mortal life also. The body they may kill, God's truth abideth still. His kingdom is forever. Amen. So there's nothing, there is nothing out there that can match a good Lutheran congregation belting this out of a morning. So try to put that in the context of a battlefield, and you'll get something of the energy of this piece. It's really a masterpiece of Lutheran art, and it translates quite smoothly into English, as you can see. Okay, so now we head on over to H.G. Wells proper. We looked at Lord Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell come to Ireland long ago, the old song said, and he never shed a drop of blood, you know. A little bit of tongue in cheek there, but okay. So after having laid out the latter part of the British monarchy, even to the time of Elizabeth II, Wells switches gears at part 4 of this chapter, and we read, upon no part of Europe did the collapse of the idea of a unified Christendom bring more disastrous consequences than to Germany. Naturally, one would have supposed that the emperor, being by origin a German, both in the case of the earlier lines and in the case of the Habs, would have developed into a national of a unified German-speaking state. It was the accidental misfortune of Germany, here we go, pay attention, that her emperors never remained German. Frederick II, the Stupor Mundi, when we read it in Durant, those of you who choose to enroll, he has an excellent explanation of Frederick II and the versatility intellectually and politically of this man. This man who goes on crusade and was excommunicated at the same time. Quite a character altogether. But look, it never remained, the Holy Roman Emperor never remained German. Frederick II, the last Hohenstaufen, your pronunciation is not better than mine, was, as we have seen, a half Orientalized Sicilian. He actually knew Arabic, believe it or not. Half Orientalized Sicilian. The Habsburgs, by marriage and inclination, become in the person of Charles V, first Burgundian and then Spanish. Burgundy is about that area of the Netherlands, let's just say. After the death of Charles V, his brother Ferdinand took Austria and the empire. And his son, Philip II, of whom there's an excellent biography by William Thomas Walsh, who actually lived, believe it or not, in Roxbury, Connecticut, which is just down the road from me. He's buried in Cheshire, but he has a huge book on Philip II that a student, herself lately deceased, Lord of mercy on her, bought for me. That's a great, you want to learn about this whole time period, the Reformation, Counter-Reformation, you read that book by William Thomas Walsh about Philip II. Anyway, Philip took Spain, the Netherlands, and South Italy, but the Austrian line, obstinately Catholic on this day that the Roman Church is choosing its Pope, obstinately Catholic, holding its patrimony mostly on the eastern frontiers, deeply entangled, therefore, with Hungarian affairs, and paying tribute, as Ferdinand and his two sons did, to the Turk, retain no grip upon northern Germans with their dispositions towards Protestantism, their Baltic and westward affinities, and their ignorance or indifference to the Turkish danger. We have to keep that in mind. And I will adduce a map here. You know, when we're having this chit chat here, and we're looking at all these internal conflicts today with the Holy Roman Emperor, and yesterday with Oliver Cromwell and the English crown, I just want to point something out here on the map, alluded to by H.G. Wells. Here we go. Here's a nice little map. That green part, you ought to be able to see my cursor. Okay, you see this green part on the right side of the screen, the Ottoman Empire? This is the 500-pound gorilla, right? We can have all our discussions about Cromwell up here and lineage and the Presbyterians and what's going on in Ireland and all of this religious shindig, if you want to call that, stuff going on here. We're going to talk tomorrow about absolutism in France. Don't ever forget this giant gorilla in the room, the Ottoman Empire. Look at this. Look at this line, right? Transylvania, Wallachia, Moldavia, up through Hungary, right? Almost into Austria. I mean, this is huge. A lot of us forget that this far north into the Balkans, there is an Islamic legacy. And so this is pressing the Muslims on the Holy Roman Emperor and Empire. And we'll talk about the psychology of the political makeup of the empire today. And part of the reason the Holy Roman Empire does not develop an absolute monarchy, yes, is because of that medieval Catholic idea of devolving civil power as far down to the little guy as possible. So yes, you do have an emperor in the German states and over the German states. But really, a lot of the power, as they find out during the Reformation, really is very much in the hands of the lower nobles. So you have that. But one of the other reasons that the Holy Roman Emperor is so, what might impress us as being ambivalent about Protestantism and about these internal conflicts, is the fact that no matter how violent and chaotic Germany gets, that threat of internal chaos needs to be balanced by the looming threat of Islam in Southern Europe that's pushing up. And so if you're the emperor, to an extent, you're very distracted. And for that matter, if you're the Pope in Rome, you're very distracted with the Islamic march and the Islamic victories in the Balkans, pushing north very earnestly. I mean, look at this. I mean, did you know that on the Crimean Peninsula there was Turkish rule? Did you know there was a Khanate of Crimea? We often forget that. So anyway, I wanted to bring that up too, because 500-pound gorillas are worth taking into account. All right, so I'll switch back to the text here. So Wells here is noting for us that, there we go, that the German princes, the emperors rather, are not very German-minded. Because also keep in mind they have these other possessions, Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, whatever. It's not even just the Turkish danger. All right, the sovereign princes, dukes, electors, prince bishops, a very peculiarly German concept, the prince bishop, and the like, whose domains cut up the map of Germany just seen into a crazy patchwork, were really not the equivalent of kings of England and France. And so now we need to learn a new word. And I really would encourage you who are following and reading along our larger learning community here at the Institute to take notes. And you want to know a word now called Sonderweg. And that is, before I define it, Sonderw, as in wife, W-E-G, Sonderweg. The W is pronounced like a V in German. Sonderweg. And we want to ask ourselves, as Wells is indicating, why doesn't Germany develop as an absolute monarchy like England or France, or for that matter, Spain? And as we move through our time together, we'll bump into this idea of the Sonderweg, which means literally the separate path. This idea that Germany develops in a separate way than the other European nations. And there are several reasons for that. One of which, and it's the only one I'm going to introduce today, is that Germany, contained within the Holy Roman Empire of our time here, Germany was never part of the Roman Empire, though the Romans tried like hell to change that. Germany was always outside of the Roman Empire, whereas England, France, Spain were within it. Now, we have the counterexample. Well, what the hell do you do with Italy? Because Italy also does not develop a civil absolute monarch, although in the Pope, it does have an absolute monarch, but one that was content to keep the other Italian city-states at each other's throats for a very long time. So Germany's Sonderweg, its separate path, having not been incorporated into the Roman Empire, helps to explain why we see a very different political trajectory in terms of unification. Germany stays decentralized far longer than other European nations, and it will try to make up for lost time in the 19th century and the 20th century. But part of that is, frankly, Roman law and Roman psychology never really sinks into the German mind. And there are plenty of other explanations of the Sonderweg. But that's just an introduction here. And that's the purpose, really, of this whole project, right? We don't need to learn every single idea behind the Sonderweg in a moment. That's the problem of modern pedagogy, is this expectation you and I have to learn everything in one class. This idea, we're going to be reading this book year in and year out at the Institute. And there is such a relief in not having to get every single detail. And I hope that's part of the genius of this project going forward. Anyhow, these princes and dukes and elector bishops and whatever were on the level of really great landholding dukes and peers comparable to England and France. Until 1701, none of them even had the title king. Many of their dominions were less, both in size and value, than the larger estates of the British nobility. The German Diet was like the Estates General or the Parliament in England, the Congress in America eventually. Of course, America doesn't exist as we understand it in the 17th century, without the presence of elected representatives. So that the Great Civil War in Germany that presently broke out, this 30 years war, and if you want, you can make a note, right? 1618 to 48. Now, what happens in 48 is one of the most important events in modern, capital L, modern European history. And if you're taking notes, you will make a note of 1648. This is the year of the Treaty of Westphalia. This is the year the modern nation state comes in to its own. This is the year Christian priests stop running states and Freemason attorneys start running states, if I want to be a bit tongue-in-cheek. This is where modern diplomacy comes to the fore. Right now, as of this broadcast, India and Pakistan, two modern nation states, are at each other's throats. They are having to deal with the consequences of 1648. It all begins here, the Treaty of Westphalia. That's what ends the 30 Years' War. It was essentially in nature much more closely akin to a civil war in England and to the War of the Fronde, which we'll talk about tomorrow. The League of Feudal Nobles against the Crown in France then appears upon the surface. Now, I'm going to boogie-woogie. I leave it to you to read the selection here, but I do want to take a look at just the nature of the fighting in the 30 Years' War, and then we'll move to some legacy remarks. War under these conditions was entirely in the hands of seasoned professional soldiers, and the question of their pay was as important a one to the generals of that time as the question of food or munitions. So we talked about this yesterday in class. We talked that one of the changes between the medieval and the modern world has to do, or actually a number of the changes have to do with the change in military foci. Yesterday, I had mentioned the switch from defensive castle-based warfare to offense and cavalry based warfare to offensive infantry-based warfare. And notice another thing, war is increasingly in the early modern period, the 17th century, a professional affair. It is something you hire men to do. You have standing armies of hirelings that you have to go fight for you. This is not the medieval levy, right? This is, on the one hand, not the knight for technological and psychological reasons. The knight is a thing of the past by this hour. But also the medieval levy, the peasant militia levy, is off on the side. So there's still militia, there's still levies, but it's giving way to the heart of the battlefield being guided by the professional, by the hireling, and by the skilled technician. You know, if you think you have artillery, well, Joe Blow may not be able to manipulate artillery appropriately, or guns, or whatever the case may be. So that's another demarcation between the medieval and the modern world, the switch from peasant levies to mercenaries. And we see that in triplicate in the 30 Years' War. As long as the struggle dragged on in the 30 Years' War from phase to phase, and the financial distress of the land increased, the commanders on both sides are forced to fall back upon looting of towns and villages, both for supply and to make up the arrears of their soldiers' pay. In fact, about 100 years before, just when the Reformation was getting off the ground, there was an infamous event in Rome where, through bureaucratic error, a bunch of Lutheran soldiers were stationed there by the Holy Roman Emperor. And in almost a comedy of errors, these men who got quite intoxicated ended up attacking Rome and looting it. And in fact, that's the anniversary, I believe, of when the Pope's Swiss Guard is sworn in. But anyway, one of the reasons they revolted wasn't just because they were sloshed on liquor, but also they were resentful that their commander owed them money. And so often the commander would, try to make up for these arrears. You see the great old word there, the arrears of pay, by promising his men to be paid in whatever booty they could steal from this, that, or the other town or city. The soldiers become, therefore, more and more mere brigands living on the country, and the 30 Years' War set up a tradition of looting as a legitimate operation in warfare, and of outrage as a soldier's privilege that has tainted the good name of Germany right down to the First World War of 1914. Do keep in mind that H.G. Wells is, very much of a certain class in England and a mindset. You wait till we get to his treatment of the Anglo-Irish War. He can barely contain his contempt for the Irish. But we get ahead of ourselves. This is my last reading from here before we switch gears on this gutting of Germany and take a look at the legacy. And I also want to look at some artwork to help us visualize this. But so we have banditry and a breakdown of things, and we read the earlier chapters of Defoe's Memoirs of a Cavalier, with its vivid description of a massacre and burning of Magdeburg, will give the reader a far better idea of the warfare of this time than any formal history. So harried was the land that the farmer ceased from cultivation. What snatch crops could be harvested were hidden away, and great clouds of starving women and children become camp followers of the armies, and supplied a thievish tale to the rougher plundering. At the close of the struggle, here we go, all Germany was ruined and desolate. Central Europe did not recover from these robberies and devastations for a century. And so that too is part of the Sonderweg of Germany. One of the explanations amongst many is that Germany is so ruined by the 30 Years' War and the brigandage of the 30 Years' War that it sets Germany back politically, economically, psychologically 100 years, which explains that scramble to catch up, that scramble before the First World War for the place in the sun, and some peculiar things in the 20th century as well. All right. So tomorrow, as I say, we'll get into Louis the 16th. There are occasionally these original illustrations and things, which are always appreciated. But now we're going to change gears. We've read our little nibble here from the outline of history. I hope everyone's following along with that. You can easily get this at a used bookstore or even a Goodwill. And I am using the 1961 edition for our classes here. Now, I'm going to cut the camera and get Mr. Watanabe on screen here. We're going to go to the screen share, you see, and take a look at some artwork concerning the 30 Years' War and additional meditations on that. So there we go. Again, here is our map, and we can see how devolved Germany is. I believe there's another map here. There we go. Here's another one where it lays out the different factions here. So notice that in the Holy Roman Empire, you have the Netherlands, right? We wouldn't associate that really being with Germany today. And then you also have Alsace, which is part of that. So Germany, so to speak, or the Holy Roman Empire, is much farther west than we would imagine from today. And then you'll notice that you have, some areas or some allied peoples outside here, of course, with the Muslims, the Ottomans, breathing down their neck. And of course, we all remember the Battle of Vienna. A little bit around this time. Let's just see, when is the Battle of Vienna? (1683), which of course marks, yep. That's a since become a Catholic feast day, the 12th of September, on account of it being the Christian victory on the 12th of September, 1863, or rather 1683. A lot of dyslexia today for myself. I don't know why. I haven't had my coffee, I suppose. But it's also the Battle of Vienna. We'll take a look at that map again. Vienna, wow, it's really deep into Europe. I mean, the Muslims got this far, my goodness. The Battle of Vienna also marks the entry of coffee. Speaking of coffee, the entry of coffee into the white man's world. The Muslims, cannot drink alcohol. And so one of the ways they get around that is to come up with very, very potent coffees and teas. And the story is that down in Arabia, some Muslim dude was trying to stay awake and read all night, which they like doing on Ramadan or whatever. And he noticed that the goats were chewing from the berries from this bush. And those became coffee grounds, long story short. And if you actually get into the etymology, because these plants came from Ethiopia, Christian Ethiopia, if you actually get into the etymology of coffee, it comes from kufar, right? It comes from what the Muslims would call the Christians in Ethiopia, which is whence comes the coffee bush, the coffee tree. So it's just an interesting thing there. So yeah, UJP. The Europeans will not be Muslims after the Battle of Vienna, and they get a free cup of coffee for it. How do you like that? All right, but more seriously, yes, you will notice that the Holy Roman Empire is much bigger than modern Germany, especially in the West. I think that would strike us with Alsace and with the Low Countries. All right, and here are some illustrations. Here's Gustavus Adolphus, the Swedish Protestant hero, often facing some of those bandits in the 30 Years' War and also facing off against the Holy Roman Empire, maintaining the independence of Sweden at a time that other nations, so-called, were not able to. Something else that H.G. Wells brings up, very well laid out here, with the nature of war changing, you have this sort of defense mechanism in order to keep off cavalry arising. So you have the guns that are quite cumbersome and take a long time to load. And so you have to come up with these kind of improvised palisades of spears in order to hold off the horses. So some men will do that whilst the others load their muskets and their matchlocks. Even more janky, if you'll forgive the language, more janky than the musket is the matchlock, where you have the open flame. Right? What makes a musket different than a matchlock? Let's take a looky here. Right, a matchlock literally has that burning flame on it, that burning wick. Whereas a musket will have the more familiar percussion of the metal on the flint, and eventually the cap, the use of the cap by the 19th century. But yeah, here you can see some very, very old examples. But here's one of a matchlock where you can see literally the wick that would have to be kept lit, and then it would, with the trigger, it would fall onto the pan here. Let's see if we can open that up a bit bigger. So the pan is very similar to your muskets. Right here you can see a little safety over it, very cute. And then you would, the fire would descend upon the pan, and that would ignite it like a bullet. Again, this will be eventually replaced by the steel and the flint, and then that replaced by the cap. But this is where it all starts. And while you're loading that, you're hoping to God that the dude with the pike isn't himself shot or wounded and can stave off the enemies long enough for you to shoot at them. So there we have a great image on multiple fronts, artistically and stylistically, but also tactically. We see. All right, there's Gustavus Adolphus. There's our matchlock. Where are my hangings? There we go. And then, of course, reprisals. There's all sorts of reprisals and religious fanaticism, both from the Catholics and the many different types of Protestants. Part of this, of course, besides hangings and mutilations of various sorts, maybe on a lighter note, would be the defenestration of Prague, which actually came up in a conversation yesterday. It's not too often you can use the word defenestration. But this refers to a few events in Prague which initiate the 30 Years' War, where I believe it was the Catholic representative of the Holy Roman Emperor is thrown out of the window by, I guess, Hussites, you would call them, and lands on a pile of manure and attributes the fortuitous safety of himself to the Virgin Mary. And of course, you can imagine, especially given the rather potty humor and locker room humor of the time, you can appreciate the response of Protestants to that miraculous claim of landing on a pile of dung. But yeah, here's the defenestration of Prague, and I must say the artist does probably a very accurate job of what you and I would look like if we were being thrown out of a window. You can see the gentleman in green here is very apprehensive of his coming fate. And this fellow is done for, at least until he lands on the pile of dung. But this is the defenestration of Prague. And I always mention this word defenestration when I teach Latin here at the Institute, because the word for window is fenestra. So you get defenestration from fenestra, literally just a noun meaning window. All right, so there we go with that. Now, finally, we move to the legacy of the 30 Years' War. I'm going to just close up these tabs for the sake of the machine, and I'll check the tech reel briefly, and then we'll be on to our last stretch here. I especially want to focus here on the legacy of the 30 Years' War, and there are many points that are appropriate there too. If you're interested in these topics, of course, as I say, we offer in-person classes with a much wider amount of reading and discussion in class. So I would encourage you to consider enrolling. All right. So something I've mentioned here, make this a little bit bigger, is the Treaty of Westphalia. Now we're looking at the consequences of the 30 Years' War. Some of those have already been alluded to. The fact that indeed Germany was devastated. The war caused massive loss of life, not only from battles, but also from famine and disease, which spread rapidly in war-torn regions. Entire towns and villages were destroyed, and agricultural lands were abandoned as armies pillaged the countryside for supplies. Civilian populations were often caught in the crossfire, with many displaced from their homes. It is estimated that some regions of Germany lost up to 40% of their population during the conflict. Right? So we see economics, psychology, spirituality, politics, all of these things are going to be influenced if 40% of your people are dead. Right? The economic consequences, trade routes were disrupted, industries collapsed, and agricultural production plummeted, leading to poverty and starvation. Social effects. Many communities were fragmented, religious persecution and demographics further destabilized the region. You have this statement after Westphalia, although I believe it was actually trotted out before, huius rex, huius religio. Whatever your king's religion is your religion. And so that's going to mean if you're not, you're living in Catholic land with a Catholic prince and you're a Protestant, you have to either convert or move and vice versa. And so this leads to disruption, leads to the disruption of culture, which needs stability. Also, frankly, leads to a rise ultimately of skepticism. Look at the Middle East right now. Look at the Islamic world outside of the Middle East. They're basically going through a reformation and an enlightenment and a few other things all at once. And just sticking on the religious, I mean, what has 20 years of the so-called war on terror and Wahhabis and Salafis and CIA dudes that are dressed up as them, what is 20 years of hand chopping and burning people alive and jihad done? Well, besides being a good sock puppet for Western intelligence, it's also soured huge amounts of Arabs to religion in general and to Islam. And you see the rise of skepticism in these polls. And it's a direct connect to the fanaticism that these groups have shown. People are disgusted by it. Well, guess what? The same stuff was going on in Germany in the 30 Years' War. And the same results, the rise of skepticism. We'll talk tomorrow in the French context and the Calvinist context of France, the rise of skepticism. In today's selection, H.G. Wells says, look at France as a bellwether of this whole shift religiously, right? Where you have a nation where nearly everyone goes to mass on Sunday and nearly nobody believes it. How does he phrase it here? Take a looky here. An age in which everybody in French society conformed to the Roman Church, and hardly anyone believed in it. So that's what you get after these wars of religion. But you also get the Treaty of Westphalia. The 30 Years' War officially ended in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, a series of treaties designed to reshape the political and religious landscape of Europe. These agreements marked a turning point in international relations and established principles that would influence diplomacy for centuries. The key provisions, what? Territorial adjustments. The Holy Roman Empire ceded territories to France and Sweden, and the independence of the Dutch Republic and Switzerland was formally recognized. Religious tolerance. The treaties reaffirmed the Peace of Augsburg, which I believe is where you actually get the original phrase, huius rex, huius religio, allowing the rulers to choose the state's religion. This provided a level of religious freedom within the Holy Roman Empire. And then ultimately, the concept of state sovereignty. The concept that state sovereignty was solidified, emphasizing the independence of states to govern without external interference. This marked the beginning of the modern system of international relations. Up until the Treaty of Westphalia, Only the Vatican, only the Papal States were sovereign. Even the Holy Roman Empire was not sovereign, insofar as the emperor was in fact crowned and oiled by the Pope. And that goes back not just for religious reasons, but also for that very deep concept of the legacy of Rome. The legacy of classical Rome was believed to continue through the Catholic Church and, yes, to the Holy Roman Empire. And so part of that is that up until Westphalia, the Papal States were the only sovereign entity. That's not going to be the case when this war is over. All right, you can give all the interdicts you want, Mr. Pope. I don't care, says the modern nation state. Okay. The Peace of Westphalia significantly weakened the Holy Roman Empire, limiting the power of the emperor and strengthening the autonomy of individual states. France emerged, as we'll find tomorrow, as the dominant European power, while Sweden gained a significant influence in Northern Europe. The treaties also established a precedent for resolving conflicts through diplomacy, right? This is the beginning of the modern nation-state system with sanctions and statements and whatever. Diplomacy rather than prolonged warfare. What are some of the long-term consequences? Okay, the decline of the Holy Roman Empire as a central authority. The empire becomes a patchwork of states. Sweden, with Gustavus Adolphus, Sweden gained territory, and Spain and its power and prestige because of the decline of the Holy Roman Empire. Therefore, Spain was married into that. Spain took a hit as well. Religious changes, of course, the rise ultimately of skepticism. And here they say a new era of religious tolerance within the Holy Roman Empire. So there's this whole idea of live and let live, which has its own consequences in modernity later on. And then significant changes to military strategies and practices. The widespread use of mercenaries, already mentioned, and the devastation they caused highlighted the need for more disciplined professional armies. The war also accelerated the development of new tactics, such as infantry and artillery movements, which would influence military engagements for centuries. All right, so there we go with that. Those are some of the legacies of this gutting of Germany, which we see as I change the camera back to the regular fella. Those are some of the legacies that we see. So tomorrow when we come back, we're going to see Spain declining, the Ottoman Empire largely having stalled out for reasons we can get into, and then the Northern European powers, Sweden, yes, and Britain, yes, but also especially France. We're going to talk about Louis XVI. We're going to see how the times have altered, and France will step into that. We're also going to extensively talk about, I think, 8 wars of religion that France undergoes. We've forgotten. We've largely forgotten the Protestant legacy of France. And so we'll get into the Huguenots and the massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day, and indeed how that affects subsequent French Catholicism, psychologically and practically. But that remains for tomorrow. Today, we've done our work. We've gotten into H.G. Wells's outline of history. This is the heart of the project. Very soon, our 1-month poetry cursus will be complete. And we will also publish with that the day-by-day, week-by-week breakdown of the readings here in the outline of history. This is the core of the project. This text read each and every year all the way through in tandem with that monthly review of poetry. And then for our enrolled students, we fleshed that out actually over 2 or 3 years with additional readings from the story of civilization, as well as literature. Like today in Outline of History, he referenced Daniel Defoe. Or for that matter, I referenced Martin Luther. If you enroll in the undergraduate program of 2 or 3 years, as your interest indicates, we will actually read those documents and we will discuss those documents as well. So that's the genius of this project here is it allows me to speak to our larger learners, and you and I at a distance can get through the core material, and our in-person students here in Connecticut, as well as our online private students, are able to also plug into that. And that's going to build, as the years go along, that's going to build a real spirit of collegiality amongst the staff and students here. So just all good stuff when it comes to the project. And I want to thank you for your attention in this daily broadcast. I will be back later today with a very deep dive on the Hartford, Connecticut homeschool and medical rights rally. And I have a take on it that you're not going to hear elsewhere. Let's just put it that way. But for now, thank you for your attention. Please consider enrolling. That's the best way to help grow the Institute is to be one of our students. And failing that, please consider donating to our Off Your Hands donation program. Get back that space in your garage, your attic, your barn, your basement. Get that space back and help Apocatastasis out. You have old cars, old tractors, chainsaws, guns, tabletop tools. Get you that free space and get that money put towards growing our institute. And this institute is just as much yours as it is mine. Anyway, thanks for hanging out, and maybe I'll see you later today at that homeschool treatment here. And just before we knock off, I see there's one comment. Okay. There, and this is from Pepsi Cola Dodo. Hi, what is this stream? So this stream is the project where we go through history using H.G. Wells's outline of history in addition to other texts. All right, question is answered, and I'm out. Bye-bye.